The smoke came first, rolling over the Badlands like a dark prophecy. Elias Trent stood on the porch of his ranch house, watching the horizon turn from blue to orange to black. The air tasted of ash and endings. He was 73 years old, his hands gnarled from 6 decades of hard work, his face weathered to leather by sun and wind, and the particular cruelty of hope deferred. Behind him, the house creaked in the hot wind, a small structure his grandfather had built in 1897, every board and nail carrying the weight of family history. In 2 days, none of it would be his anymore. The foreclosure notice sat on the kitchen table, the words as final as a headstone. Final notice, auction date set, property transfer imminent. The bank had been patient. Elias had to give them that. 3 years of missed payments, 3 years of drought and cattle disease, and the slow erosion of everything he'd worked for. But patience had limits, and those limits had been reached. The wildfire changed. Oh, the timeline. It had started 40 miles north 3 days ago, a lightning strike in the tinder-dry grassland. The wind had carried it south with terrifying speed, consuming everything in its path: ranches, forests, wildlife. The evacuation order had come through on the radio that morning. All residents of Copper Valley must evacuate immediately. The fire was expected to reach the southern properties by nightfall. Elias had spent the day loading his truck with what mattered: photographs of his late wife, Catherine, his grandfather's pocket watch, the deed to land he'd already lost. Not much else seemed worth saving. The cattle were already sold, payment going directly to the bank. The equipment was broken or outdated. The house itself was more burden than asset at this point. He was loading the last box when he saw it, through the thickening smoke, up in the box canyon that bordered his northern fence line. Movement. A flash of white against the darkening sky. The horse. Elias sat down. The box slowly, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. He knew this animal. Everyone in Copper Valley knew this animal. The ghost Mustang, they called it. A wild stallion that roamed the Badlands. Pure white except for distinctive red markings on both ears that locals said looked like caps or crowns. Medicine hat, the old-timers called the pattern, though most people just called the horse trouble. It had evaded capture for years, had kicked in fences, scattered cattle, led domestic horses away from their pastures. The Bureau of Land Management had tried to round it up 6 times, failed every time. Some ranchers had taken shots at it, claiming it was a menace. The horse had become legend, something wild and untamable, belonging to no one, answerable to nothing. The fire was coming to claim a legend, and Elias was the only one standing in its way. But real quick before he drives into the smoke, if you love stories about the wild spirit of the West, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the rest of the story. Now, let's see if he could catch the uncatchable. And now it was trapped. Elias could see the problem even from a distance. The box canyon had 3 walls of sheer rock and 1 narrow entrance. The stallion must have run in there fleeing the smoke, not realizing the only exit was blocked by the heavy barbed wire fence Elias had installed years ago to keep his cattle from wandering into the canyon and breaking their legs on the rocky terrain. The horse was pacing, clearly panicked, clearly unable to escape, and the fire was maybe an hour away, moving fast, consuming everything. Elias looked at his truck, packed and ready, looked at the road leading south, away from the flames, looked back at the canyon where a wild animal thrashed against its trap. Every rational thought told him to leave. The evacuation order was mandatory. The fire was deadly. The horse was wild and dangerous, had never let a human within 50 yards without attacking or fleeing. Trying to help it would be suicide. And for what? To save an animal that had caused him nothing but trouble? But Elias thought about Catherine, dead now 5 years, who used to leave water out for stray dogs and feed scraps to crows, who had once driven 3 hours in a blizzard to rescue a neighbor's cat from a tree, who had believed, fundamentally and unshakably, that suffering demanded response, regardless of inconvenience or risk. He thought about the horse, wild and free, burning alive in a trap of human making. He grabbed his wire cutters from the truck bed and started running toward the canyon. Behind him, the evacuation siren wailed its final warning. The heat hit Elias before he reached the fence line. The fire was closer than he'd thought, close enough that he could hear it now. A sound like a locomotive or a waterfall, constant and deafening. The smoke was thick enough to make breathing difficult, each inhale scorching his throat, making his eyes water and sting. He climbed through his own fence and scrambled up the rocky approach to the box canyon. His knees protested, his lungs burned. He was too old for this, too broken down for heroics. But he kept moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant recognizing how stupid this was. The canyon entrance appeared through the smoke, and there, behind the barbed wire, was the stallion. Up close, the horse was magnificent. Larger than Elias had realized, maybe 16 hands, with powerful shoulders and legs built for speed and endurance. His coat was indeed pure white, luminous even in the smoke-dimmed light. The red markings on his ears were striking, cap-like patches of color that made the animal look crowned, regal despite his terror. The stallion saw Elias and reared, screaming a challenge that cut through even the fire's roar. His eyes rolled white, foam flecked his mouth. Every muscle in his body was coiled with panic and aggression. "Easy," Elias said, though his voice was immediately lost in the noise. He approached the fence carefully, keeping his movements slow and visible. The barbed wire was old and heavy, multiple strands wound between posts, designed to contain cattle, not to be quickly removed. He started cutting, working from the bottom up, each snip of the wire cutters requiring strength his hands barely possessed anymore. The first strand parted, then the second. The stallion paced behind the fence, his hooves striking sparks on stone, his entire being radiating wild fear. Behind Elias, the fire crested the ridge. He could feel the heat intensify, could see orange light dancing through the smoke. Minutes now, maybe less. He cut the third strand, the fourth. His hands were bleeding where the wire had caught his palms. Sweat ran into his eyes, mixing with tears from the smoke. The fifth strand parted, and suddenly there was space. Enough room for the horse to squeeze through if it would just calm down enough to see. The opening. But the stallion wasn't calm. He was beyond reason, beyond anything except pure animal terror. He raced from one side of the small canyon to the other, crashing against rock walls, screaming his fear into the smoke. Elias looked at the opening, looked at the horse, looked at the fire, now close enough that embers were landing around him, small fires starting in the dry brush. The horse would never come through on its own. Too panicked, too wild. Elias did the only thing he could think of. He had to get closer. The distance between the fence and the horse was only 20 yards, but in the canyon, distance wasn't measured in feet anymore. It was measured in heat. The air temperature inside the box canyon had spiked to something unsurvivable. Elias could feel the moisture evaporating from his skin, his eyes drying out instantly every time he blinked. The stallion was backed into the far corner, trapped between two boulders, trembling so violently his hooves clattered against the stone floor. "I know," Elias rasped, his voice sounding thin and foreign in the roar of the fire. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too." He needed a plan. He couldn't just walk up to a wild stallion in a panic state. The horse weighed 1,200 pounds. If he kicked, he would shatter Elias's ribs. If he struck with a front hoof, he would cave in a skull. But leaving wasn't an option, not anymore. Elias unbuckled his belt. It was old leather, thick and sturdy. He didn't have a lead rope. He didn't have a halter. He had a belt and a coat. He stepped through the gap he'd cut in the wire. The stallion's head snapped toward him. The horse flattened his ears, a universal sign of aggression. He bared his teeth, snapping the air. "Don't come closer." Elias stopped. He stood perfectly still, letting the heat wash over him. "I'm not going to hurt you," Elias said, pitching his voice low, under the roar of the flames. "I'm the only chance you got, son. You fight me, we both burn." He took a step. The stallion lunged. It was a bluff charge, a terrifying display of power meant to drive a predator away. The horse slammed his front hooves into the dirt 5 feet from Elias, dust exploding upward. Elias didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He held his ground, looking the horse in the eye. "You done?" Elias asked calmly. "Because the fire don't care how tough you are." He took another step. The stallion backed up, hitting the rock wall. He looked left, then right. Trapped. The realization seemed to break something in him. The aggression drained away, replaced by a pure distillation of terror. He was a prey animal in a box, and the predator was smoke and heat. Elias moved in. He was 10 feet away now, close enough to smell the horse, sweat and dust and the metallic scent of fear. The heat was becoming a physical weight. Behind Elias, a pine tree on the ridge exploded into flames, the sap boiling instantly. The sound was like a gunshot. The horse shied violently, slipping on the loose shale. Elias lunged. It was now or never. He grabbed the stallion's mane, a thick, tangled mass of coarse hair. The horse jerked his head up, lifting Elias off his feet. For a second, Elias dangled there, 73 years of age and arthritis versus raw, primal power. His shoulders screamed in protest. His grip began to slip. "Whoa!" Elias shouted, hanging on with desperate strength. "Down! Get down!" He used his weight to drag the horse's head back to earth. The stallion danced sideways, crushing Elias's foot with a hoof. The pain was blinding, white hot, but Elias didn't let go. If he let go, the horse would bolt back into the canyon, deeper into the trap. He managed to get his feet back on the ground. He was standing chest to chest with the animal now. This was the moment of truth. Elias looked into the horse's eye. It was wide, rolling, showing the white sclera. But deep inside that panic, Elias saw intelligence. This wasn't a mindless beast. This was a creature that wanted to live. "I got you," Elias whispered, his face inches from the horse's muzzle. "I got you." He needed to blind him. Horses are visual creatures. If they can see the danger, they react to it. If the fire was invisible, maybe, just maybe, the instinct to flee would be overridden by the instinct to trust. Elias let go of the mane with one hand, fumbling with the buttons of his coat. His fingers were stiff, clumsy. The heat was making him dizzy. Button, button, button. He shrugged the coat off his shoulders. The horse flinched at the movement, jerking his head. "Easy," Elias crooned. "It's just a coat, just a blanket." He raised the heavy canvas. The stallion snorted, tossing his head. Elias didn't wait. He threw the coat. It wasn't elegant. It was a desperate flailing motion. But his aim was true. The heavy wool lining caught on the horse's ears, and the weight of the canvas pulled it down over his eyes. Darkness. The stallion froze. For a heartbeat, the canyon was silent except for the roar. Of the fire, the horse stood trembling, blinded, waiting for the attack. But the attack didn't come. Instead, he felt hands, calloused, gentle hands. Elias quickly looped his leather belt around the horse's neck, creating a makeshift neck rope. It wasn't much control, but it was a connection, a lifeline. "Okay," Elias breathed, sweat dripping off his nose. "Okay, now we walk." He tugged on the belt. The stallion planted his feet. He wouldn't move, he couldn't see, and the air smelled of death, and he was terrified. "Come on!" Elias shouted, pulling harder. "Move!" The horse refused. He was a statue of white marble and fear. Elias looked back. The fire had jumped the ridge. The brush near the canyon entrance was burning. The gap in the fence, their only exit, was wreathed in smoke. They had minutes. Elias turned back to the horse. He didn't hit him. He didn't yell. He leaned in close, pressing his cheek against the rough canvas covering the horse's face. "I'm not leaving you," Elias whispered, into the horse's ear. "You understand? I'm staying right here. If we burn together. But I'd prefer we didn't." He started to hum. It was a ridiculous thing to do in the middle of an inferno, but it was the only tool he had left. He hummed the tune Catherine used to sing, the old rugged cross, low and steady, a vibration that traveled from his chest into the horse's neck. On a hill far away, the stallion's ear twitched. He swiveled it toward the sound, stood an old rugged cross. The vibration was calming. It was a constant in the chaos. Elias took a step. He kept the tension on the belt steady, not pulling, just inviting. The stallion lifted a hoof, put it down. Then he took a step. "Good boy," Elias choked out, tears streaming down his soot-streaked face. "That's a good boy." They began to move. It was a nightmare procession. A blindfolded wild horse and an old man with a crushed foot walking through hell. They reached the fence line. The heat here was intense enough to singe hair. The smoke was a solid wall. Elias coughed, bending double, but he didn't stop humming. He couldn't stop. If the rhythm broke, the spell would break. He guided the horse through the cut wire. A barb snagged the stallion's flank. The horse jumped, nearly crushing Elias against a post. "Easy!" Elias steadied him. "Just a scratch. Keep moving." They cleared the fence, but they weren't safe yet. The fire was moving faster than Elias had calculated. It was racing up the slope from the south, cutting off the easy route to the road. They had to go down, toward the riverbed. The slope was steep, covered in loose shale and scrub brush that was already smoking. "Watch your step," Elias murmured. "Trust me." He picked his way down the slope, sliding in the loose rock. The stallion followed, placing his hooves tentatively, trusting the man on the other end of the belt to keep him from falling into the abyss. Halfway down, a burning branch fell from a tree above them. It landed directly in their path, sparking and hissing. The stallion smelled the burning wood. He stopped. He started to back up, pulling against the belt. He was going to bolt. He was going to run back up the hill, back into the fire, because panic says run away from the scary thing, even if it means running toward death. Elias felt the tension on the belt. He knew he couldn't hold 1,200 pounds of terrified animal. He did something reckless. He turned and walked straight into the horse's chest. He pushed him, physically shoved the animal backward, away from the burning branch, but also blocking his retreat. "No!" Elias shouted. "Not that way! With me!" He grabbed the coat covering the horse's face and pulled his head down. "Listen to me! We go down! We go down!" The horse froze, confused by the aggression. Elias used the moment. He stepped around the burning branch and tugged the belt. Hard. "Come on!" The stallion hesitated. Then he lunged forward, leaping over the burning wood, landing heavily on the slope below. They slid the rest of the way. It wasn't walking. It was a controlled fall. Elias lost his footing, sliding on his back, dragging the horse with him. The stallion sat on his haunches, sliding like a dog, hooves scrabbling for purchase. They hit the bottom of the ravine in a cloud of dust and gravel, the riverbed. It was dry, but it was wide, a scar of bare rock cutting through the landscape. No fuel, no brush, just stone. Safety. Elias scrambled to his feet. He checked the horse. The coat was still in place. The horse was shaking, sweating profusely, but he was standing. Elias looked back up the slope. The fire had reached the top. The spot where they had been standing 30 seconds ago was now a wall of flame. They had made it. By seconds. Elias leaned against the stallion's shoulder. His legs gave out. He slid down the horse's leg until he was sitting in the dirt. The horse didn't move. He stood there, blindfolded, waiting. Elias reached up with a trembling hand. He found the collar of the coat. "Okay," he whispered. "Show's over." He pulled the coat off. The stallion blinked in the sudden light. He looked around. He saw the fire on the ridge. He saw the riverbed. He saw the old man sitting in the dirt at his feet. He snorted, blowing dust from his nose. Elias waited for him to run, to bolt for freedom. But the horse lowered his head. He sniffed Elias's hair. He sniffed the hand that was still clutching the leather belt. He nudged Elias's shoulder. Gentle, inquisitive. "You okay?" Elias started to laugh. It was a ragged, hysterical sound that turned into a cough. "Yeah," Elias said, wiping his eyes. "I'm okay. We're okay." He unbuckled the belt from the horse's neck. "Go on," Elias said. "Get out of here. Go find some water." The stallion took a few steps away. Then he stopped. He turned back. He looked at Elias one last time, engraving the image of the man into his memory. Then he turned and trotted down the riverbed, disappearing into the smoke, a white ghost, fading into the gray. He took off his coat, a heavy canvas rancher's coat, lined with wool, the only winter coat he owned, and walked into the canyon. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to get out while he still could. But Catherine's voice was in his head, gentle and insistent. "You can't leave a living thing to burn." "Easy, boy," Elias said, his voice rasping from smoke. "Easy now." The stallion wheeled to face him, ears pinned flat, ready to attack. A wild horse this size could kill a man easily, could crush his skull with those hooves, could bite through bone. Elias kept walking, kept speaking in low, steady tones. Not words anymore, just sound. The kind of murmuring rhythm Catherine had used with frightened animals, the cadence of comfort and safety. He got close enough to see his own reflection in the horse's dark, terrified eyes. Then, in one swift motion, he threw the coat over the stallion's head. The horse exploded into motion, rearing and bucking, but the coat stayed in place, blindfolding him. In the sudden darkness, his panic-changed character became less frantic. His movements, while still violent, lost their directional certainty. Elias grabbed a handful of mane with one hand, kept the other on the coat to hold it steady, and began leading the horse toward the fence opening. It was like trying to steer a hurricane. The stallion fought every step, throwing his head, trying to rear, his massive weight dragging Elias off his feet repeatedly. But Elias held on, kept singing, an old lullaby Catherine had sung to their daughter, dead now 20 years, taken by fever when she was just 6. The melody was simple, wordless, a pattern of sound that cut through chaos with its sheer familiarity. Step by terrible step, they moved toward the opening. The fire was in the canyon now, flames licking at the entrance, smoke so thick Elias couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The heat was unbearable. His exposed skin felt like it was cooking. His lungs screamed for clean air that didn't exist anymore. They reached the fence opening. Elias guided the stallion through, the horse's body scraping against the cut wires, blood darkening the white coat. But they made it through, made it to the other side. Elias led him away from the canyon, down the rocky slope, toward the riverbed that ran along the eastern boundary of his property. The river was dry, had been for months, but the rocky channel was clear of brush, offered refuge from the flames. They stumbled down the slope together, man and horse bound by canvas and desperation. When they reached the riverbed, Elias finally released his grip on the coat, let it fall away from the stallion's head. The horse stood absolutely still for a moment, sides heaving, nostrils flaring as he processed the return of sight. Elias stepped back, giving him space, preparing for the stallion to bolt or attack now that he was free. But the horse didn't bolt. He turned his head and looked directly at Elias. Really looked at him. Their eyes met across the smoke-filled air, and something passed between them, recognition maybe, or understanding, or simply acknowledgement of what had just transpired. The stallion took one step closer, lowered his head, let out a breath that sounded almost like a sigh. Then he turned and galloped into the smoke, disappearing like the ghost everyone claimed he was. Elias collapsed onto the rocks, his body giving out now that the immediate crisis had passed. He lay there gasping, watching the fire consume his ranch. The barn went first, the old wood going up like kindling. Then the equipment shed. The house held out longer, but eventually the flames found it too. By dawn, everything Elias Trent owned had been reduced to ash and twisted metal. He sat in the ruins as the sun came up, covered in soot and blood, exhausted beyond anything he'd ever felt. He'd lost the ranch to the bank, lost his possessions to the fire, lost everything, except somehow he didn't feel empty. He'd saved the horse. That mattered. Maybe it was the only thing that did. Elias closed his eyes and let the smoke-tinged sunrise warm his face. The sound woke him. Elias had dozed off sitting against a burned post, his body too exhausted to care about comfort. He came awake suddenly, his old rancher's instincts alerting him to something wrong, something different, a rhythmic thunder, like hoofbeats, many hoofbeats. He struggled to his feet, every muscle protesting, grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the post, one of the few things that had survived the fire. His hands shook as he checked the chamber, more from exhaustion than fear. The sound grew louder. Elias squinted toward the eastern ridge, the direction of the rising sun, and froze. Riders. Hundreds of them. Silhouetted against the dawn sky, they appeared along the ridge in a line that seemed to stretch forever. They began descending toward his property with slow, deliberate precision, moving in, formation that spoke of purpose and unity. Elias's heart hammered. His first irrational thought was that he was being attacked, that some old conflict had finally come home. But as the riders drew closer and details emerged, he realized this wasn't an attack, it was a procession. The riders wore traditional Native American regalia, ceremonial dress with feathered headdresses, beaded vests, painted faces. They rode horses decorated with symbols Elias didn't understand, but recognized as significant. Some carried staffs with feathers and other sacred objects. Others held drums that beat a steady rhythm that matched their horses' steps. They weren't from around here. Elias knew that immediately. These were Lakota from the reservation 3 valleys over. He'd had minimal contact with them over the years, some trading, the occasional shared concern about water rights or land disputes. But nothing that would explain this. 500 riders, he estimated. Maybe more. They surrounded his ruined ranch in a perfect circle, their horses perfectly still, their expressions solemn. The silence was profound. Then a single rider separated from the group. An older man, perhaps Elias's age, with long gray braids and a face marked by deep lines of wisdom and sorrow. He wore an elaborate headdress and a vest decorated with intricate quill work. He rode a paint horse with practiced ease, and beside him, on a lead rope, walked the white stallion. The horse's coat was cleaned now, brilliant white in the morning sun, except for the red medicine hat markings on his ears. He moved calmly, with none of yesterday's panic, his bearing regal and composed. The elder rode forward until he was perhaps 20 feet from Elias, then dismounted with careful dignity. 2 younger riders dismounted as well, staying slightly behind their leader. Elias lowered his rifle, understanding that whatever this was, it wasn't a threat, at least not in the conventional sense. The elder studied Elias for a long moment, his dark eyes seeming to catalog every detail. The soot-stained clothes, the bleeding hands, the exhaustion written in every line of his weathered face. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep and carried easily across the quiet morning. "You are Elias Trent." It wasn't a question. I am called Standing Bear. I am chairman of the Lakota Nation, keeper of traditions, speaker for our people." He gestured to the white stallion. "You know this horse. I freed him from the fire, yesterday, in the canyon where he was trapped by wire designed to cage, to contain." Standing Bear's expression didn't change, but something in his tone carried weight. "You cut that wire with your own hands. You blindfolded him with your coat and led him to safety while fire consumed your home. You sang to him to calm his fear." Elias blinked. "How do you know that?" "Because he told us." The words hung in the air, impossible and yet somehow fitting in this strange dawn gathering. Standing Bear walked closer to the stallion, placed his hand on the horse's neck with obvious affection and reverence. "This horse is not what your people think he is. He is not a wild nuisance to be captured or killed. He is Spirit Walker, prophesied in our oldest stories. A white horse with the red medicine hat who carries the soul of Chief Running Water, greatest of our ancestors. For 5 generations, we have waited for his return. For 5 generations, we have searched." He turned back to Elias, his eyes bright with emotion. 3 months ago, our spiritual leaders had a vision. Spirit Walker had returned to these lands. They saw him in dreams, running free, waiting to be recognized. We searched everywhere, sent scouts, asked ranchers if they had seen him, but always he vanished before we could confirm. Standing Bear gestured to the burned ruins of Elias's ranch. Yesterday, as the fire burned, our scouts saw smoke, and through that smoke, they saw a miracle. An old man leading a white horse to safety, singing the old songs, showing courage when he should have shown fear, giving his coat to warm an animal when he should have thought only of himself. One of the younger riders stepped forward, carrying something wrapped in ceremonial cloth. He handed it to Standing Bear, who carefully unwrapped it to reveal a leather pouch. "We know your circumstances, Elias Trent. We know the bank claims your land. We know the fire took your possessions. We know you are a man with nothing." Standing Bear held out the pouch. "We cannot allow the man who saved Spirit Walker to suffer for his courage." Elias took the pouch with trembling hands. It was heavy, surprisingly so. He opened it carefully. Inside was gold dust and turquoise. The turquoise was raw, uncut, but clearly high quality, deep blue with perfect matrix patterns. The kind of stone that commanded premium prices from collectors and jewelers. "That gold was mined by our ancestors," Standing Bear said. "That turquoise comes from sacred deposits on our land. Together, their value is approximately $200,000, more than enough to settle your debts and rebuild what was lost." Elias stared at the pouch, unable to process what he was hearing. "I can't accept this. I just couldn't let the horse burn." "Exactly. You couldn't. When you could have fled to safety, when you had every reason to think only of yourself, you chose differently. You chose mercy. You chose courage. Standing Bear's voice softened. Spirit Walker is more than a horse to us. He is our connection to our ancestors, to our traditions, to everything we hold sacred. You saved our legacy. Now, we save yours. He turned to the assembled riders and spoke in Lakota, his words formal and ceremonial. As he spoke, the riders began to dismount. All of them, 500 men and women, moving with coordinated purpose. Standing Bear turned back to Elias. We will rebuild your barn. We will repair your fences. We will restore what the fire took. This is our honor. This is our gratitude. You don't have to. We do. Because Spirit Walker chose you. He could have fled from you yesterday, could have trampled you when you blindfolded him. But he trusted you, and his trust is sacred. Standing, Bear placed his hand on Elias's shoulder. You are part of our story now, Elias Trent. Part of the legacy of Spirit Walker. That bond cannot be broken. Over the next week, the Lakota Nation transformed Elias's property. They worked from dawn to dusk, a coordinated effort that felt less like construction and more like ceremony. The barn rose from the ashes, built with traditional techniques combined with modern materials. Fences were repaired. The burned equipment was hauled away, replaced with tools and supplies donated from the reservation. Elias worked alongside them, despite protests that he should rest. He learned names, learned customs, learned that Standing Bear had lost his own wife 3 years ago, that they shared the particular grief of outliving the people who'd made life worth living. Spirit Walker grazed in the pasture, no longer wild, no longer fleeing human contact. He stayed close to the work, as if overseeing the restoration, occasionally walking over to Elias and Standing Bear to press his nose against their shoulders. He has chosen his person, Standing Bear said one evening as they watched the horse in the fading light. Twice now. Once when you saved him. Again when he could have run yesterday but stayed. What does that mean? It means you are his keeper now. He will live here, on your land, under your protection. But he belongs to the people, to all of us, to the sacred traditions he represents. Standing, Bear smiled. A shared responsibility, like family. On the 8th day, the work was complete. The barn stood solid and strong, the fences were perfect. Supplies filled the storage areas, enough feed and materials to last Elias through winter and beyond. The Lakota prepared to leave. They formed up. In the same ceremonial manner they had arrived, 500 riders ready to return to the reservation. But before they left, Standing Bear pulled Elias aside. The bank will contact you. They will try to claim the land still, despite the payment. They will say the deadline has passed, that contracts must be honored. His expression was serious. Do not worry. We have lawyers. We have resources. We have documented everything. Your land is yours. This is guaranteed. Why are you doing all this? The horse is safe. You could have just taken him and left. Standing Bear looked at Elias with eyes that held depths of sorrow and wisdom. Because Spirit Walker showed us something we had forgotten. That mercy exists beyond boundaries. That courage lives in unexpected places. That an old white rancher and an ancient sacred horse could find connection in fire and ash. He paused. You reminded us that the best things we do are the things we do simply because they are right, not for reward, not for recognition, just because suffering demands response. He gripped Elias's hand firmly. You saved more than a horse, friend. You saved our faith that such men still exist. Men who choose kindness when cruelty would be easier, who risk everything for nothing except the knowledge that it's right. The riders departed as they had arrived, in ceremony, in silence, in perfect formation. Elias stood beside his rebuilt barn, watching them crest the ridge and disappear, leaving only dust and hoofprints and the feeling that something profound had shifted in his understanding of the world. Spirit Walker remained, grazing peacefully in the pasture, his white coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. That night, Elias sat on his porch, a new porch built by Lakota hands, and opened the letter from the bank that had arrived that afternoon. It was stamped, paid in full. The foreclosure had been canceled. The land was his, free and clear. He thought about the last 2 weeks, about losing everything, about choosing to save a wild horse instead of himself, about 500 warriors arriving at dawn to restore what fire had taken, about Catherine, who would have loved every moment of this impossible story. Spirit Walker wandered over to the porch, stuck his head over the railing, and huffed softly. Elias reached out and scratched behind the red-marked ears, feeling the warm solidity of the animal, the trust that had somehow formed between them. "You're not what anyone expected," Elias said quietly. "Neither am I suppose." The horse's dark eyes regarded him calmly. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe the important things never look like we expect. Maybe they come dressed in fire and terror and impossible choices. And maybe we only become who we're meant to be when we stop calculating cost and just respond to what's right in front of us." Spirit Walker pressed his nose against Elias's chest, and they stood together as darkness fell and the stars emerged, an old man and a sacred horse, both of them saved, both of them exactly where they belonged. The wind carried the scent of sage and new timber, and the particular promise of second chances earned through courage rather than luck. Elias closed his eyes and let the peace settle over him like a blessing. He'd lost everything and gained a world, saved a horse and been saved in return, chosen mercy and received grace. Some exchanges, he realized, could never be measured in dollars or deeds or any conventional accounting. Some bonds existed outside normal categories, connecting souls across species and culture and circumstance in ways that defied explanation but demanded acknowledgement. Spirit Walker nickered softly. In the distance, coyotes began their evening songs. The rebuilt barn stood solid against the night sky, and Elias Trent, who had been prepared to lose his legacy to bank foreclosures and fire, understood that legacy wasn't about land or structures or material inheritance. It was about the choices made in fire, the courage shown in crisis, the connections forged when everything else burned away. He would rebuild his life here, with a sacred horse as companion, with a nation as family, with the knowledge that sometimes the world gave back exactly what you needed when you stopped asking for it and simply did what was right. The night deepened, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and on a small ranch in the Badlands, surrounded by ashes that had given birth to hope, an old rancher and a legendary stallion stood together in the darkness, proof that the best miracles are the ones we create through simple acts of unreasonable kindness.